Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The president's political position is eroding remarkably quickly. A new Fox News poll just out today shows 51%, a majority of registered voters believe Trump should not only be impeached, but removed as well. 51%. And this is happening because the president's misdeeds are clear and indisputable. We already know President Trump corruptly uses power to coerce an occupied country into manufacturing dirt in his political opponent. We know that from documents the president himself has released. Remember, I would like you to do us a favor, though, and from things the president has admitted, and from things the president has done in front of us.
Mr. President, what exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Biden after your phone call? Exactly.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens.
But what we continue to learn every day is the sheer scope of the enterprise and the consciousness of guilt of nearly everyone involved. That this whole enterprise was directed by the president. CNN reports that as early as May, 2 months before his now infamous phone call with the Ukrainian president, President Trump told Energy Secretary Rick Perry and 2 senior State Department officials, including the U.S. ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, remember him, to deal with Trump's private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, about planning a meeting with Ukraine's president. If they can satisfy Rudy, they can satisfy the president, a person familiar with the meeting said. Rudy, of course, was running around trying to manufacture dirt in the president's enemies. The president told a cabinet secretary and 2 senior State Department officials to work with his attorney on the scheme, to seek foreign help, to undermine his political rival. And then 2 months later, he told the president of Ukraine the same thing. Remember, in the call notes, I will have Mr. Giuliani give you a call. All this was happening in such a way that people involved knew how wrong it was. And it's incredibly important to hold on to that simple fact as the president and his allies attempt a kind of massive Jedi mind trick to just wave it all away, convince everyone that what the president did was fine. But it wasn't fine, and they knew it wasn't fine. The Washington Post reported last month that President Trump directly ordered his acting chief of staff to hold back that $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, passed by both houses. And now the New York Times reports that when the Trump administration finally released the military aid, American diplomats were advised to downplay the decision and treat Trump's initial holdup in the release of the funds as an administrative matter. One State Department official even wrote in an email, I'm quoting here, "Keep moving, people. Nothing to see here." Now, nothing to see here is just unbelievably inculpatory. Because nothing to see here means, I know this is a big scandal, I know this is a crime, and I know this is wrong, and you all know it too, so I'm going to make a joke about it because we can't talk about the fact that we are now enmeshed in wrongdoing. Again and again and again, we see consciousness of guilt and awareness by many parties of what was happening. That continues to be the theme here. Remember, the whistleblower's first memo shows people in the White House knew how wrong it was. Quote, White House officials who told me this information were deeply disturbed by what had transpired in the phone call. Well, now, today, CBS has a different memo from that same whistleblower, written after speaking to a White House official who heard the entirety of Trump's phone call. The whistleblower writing, in the official's view, the president had clearly committed a criminal act, a crime. I just witnessed the president commit a crime. What can you say to that? Well, the president and his defenders are basically trying 2 arguments. One is that what President Trump did was totally fine, a perfect phone call. And the other is a kind of nonstop fire hose of ridiculous process claims. Adam Schiff is this, Nancy Pelosi that, a kangaroo court, yada, yada, yada. The whistleblower only had secondhand knowledge. None of that matters because the facts are already in the light. We have them. They're in documents and texts and admissions by the president. They're all there, including the crime. And I say crime advisedly. I'm not the independent observer of the crime. It was a White House official who works for the president who listened to the phone call that led the whistleblower to write, in the official's view, the president had clearly committed a criminal act. The whistleblower also puts one question to rest while only raising a whole host of new ones. Quote, the standard White House practice for presidential level phone calls with world leaders is for the White House Situation Room to produce a word for word electronic transcript that memorializes the call. In this case, the official told me, such a transcript had indeed been produced and was being treated very sensitively in hard copy only. So there is, according to the whistleblower, a word for word transcript of Trump's phone call that we don't have. The White House can stonewall all they want. They can fight on privilege grounds. They can stop people from testifying. The one thing that we have to see before this is all over is that word for word transcript. of Trump's phone call with Ukraine's president. Trump has no grounds to stop that. The president himself says it's a perfect call. The president himself released the call notes. He's waived any privilege. We must see the perfect call in its complete word-for-word version so that all of us, Lindsey Graham, members in the House, you and I, can all marvel at just how perfect it is. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.